Joining us here in studio, the star witness of the January 6th hearings, who served as the top aide to Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. She's written a new memoir called Enough. Cassidy Hutchinson, welcome to Pod Save America.
Thank you guys for having me.
So I want to start by saying that, like most of America, I first saw you when you testified before the January 6th committee. It was obviously the right thing to do, but just because something is obvious doesn't make it easy. And so I have a lot of respect and admiration for what you did, which came at great risk to your future and even your personal safety. I know you said you were nervous about returning to the spotlight like this. What's it been like so far? And has your nervousness been justified?
Yeah, I like to say I operate probably at a constant level of like a level 4 of anxiety, which I think it's to me it's a benefit. It keeps you a little sharp. It keeps
you've gone through. I'd say that's pretty good. Yeah.
It's been like a week and a half since the book release. I had some time to prepare myself for it, just like as I was writing the book in collaboration with my fantastic collaborator Mark Salter, who helped me. Yeah, fantastic writer, fantastic human. Perfect person to help me write this book, as he was very never Trump from the beginning. So got some very good sparring matches, but all for the benefit, I hope and believe in the book. All of that said, with Mark's counsel too, I don't think I ever really could have prepared myself for being in the spotlight again. This is not something I ever saw myself doing, but I realize and recognize the gravity of this moment, and it's important to have voices and people like us, hopefully, that we can sit and have a diplomatic and productive conversation, even though we might not politically agree on everything, because there's a much bigger issue at stake, and that's our country and our democracy. So, that said, it's been an adjustment. I don't think it'll ever feel normal, but
I'm sure.
Good.
So I've talked to plenty of Trump voters. I'm related to a few. You are the first Trump voter I've talked to who's actually worked for him.
Really?
Yeah. I don't think any Trump staffers
on this podcast?
I think ever. I'm pretty sure ever. Like I said, a lot of never Trumpers. Trump voters I've sat with in focus groups. I know some, but no one has worked in the White House for Donald Trump or in the campaign. So I'm not interested in shaming you for that, but I really want to try to understand it, just with an eye towards figuring out how we can all make sure he doesn't end up in the White House again, which I know is a goal you share. So just to start, what was it about Trump at that first rally you went to in April of 2017, I believe, that made you want to work for him? You described him in the book as Matt. You talked about his magnetism. You said you were transfixed. What was it in that rally?
There's a long and a short answer. The short answer is at that moment, at the first rally, I didn't have in my mind, my goal is to work for Donald Trump in the White House.
Right.
I set off to have a career in public service. I identified with the Republican Party, and I had internships on Capitol Hill that summer. That said, though, I did vote for him in 2016.
Right.
I identified as a Republican, but I grew up in a very apolitical family, but a blue-collar family. So being part of the Republican Party made sense to me, and I agreed with the platform. I voted for him. At that first Trump rally, I remember being in the crowd and looking around. It's so difficult to describe, because I also haven't been to a ton of other politicians' rallies, but I was standing around and just looking at not just him, but everybody around me, and it was people that I felt like I recognized, not because I knew them, but because I grew up around people like them, and I saw that they saw something in him. And then I felt pulled toward them, and then I felt pulled towards him. And it was almost this sense of he is representing people like my family. He is going to be the politician that changes things. And it wasn't like I just fell in love with the MAGA movement in that moment, but I felt the allure and I felt the draw. And I think that was the moment where my blinders sort of went off, and I was looking back now. I'm telling this as in that moment, where I sort of just shut off what he is saying about immigrants is wrong. that kind of, it didn't completely go out of my mind, but it went into the back of my mind, because what I saw there and felt there was that there was a politician that was very abnormal in terms of like what we have seen and experienced as a country. But I felt like he was there for the right reasons at the time. And again, this is...
No, I know.
I'm not including my hindsights now, but I also tried to write the book in the present moment because I wanted readers to be able to feel that connection and at least try, because it's difficult to describe and it was difficult to write about, and it's not without shame. But
yeah, no, look, I mean, I asked this partly because I've spent the last, since 2016, 2015, like trying to figure out what so many voters saw in him, if not for, there's many explanations out there, right? Yeah. You can look at people, voters with higher levels of racial resentment, are attracted to Trump. But there's this, other people will say there's a working class populist pitch. There's an anti-establishment pitch. There's I was on The Apprentice and I'm a businessman so I can be successful pitch. And I think people's motivations are complex and voters are complex, and they believe all kinds of different things. But I'm just like, I'm so curious what it was for you. Like, what part of the message for you was like, this is...
I think at first it really was... I mean, this is such a good question. I've thought a lot about it. It's hard to just put into words. I think at first it was really less about specific policy initiatives, and it was more about how he spoke to people and how people felt they could relate to him. And, I would hear my parents or my relatives talk, not necessarily in admiration of the policies, but talk in admiration of how they felt represented for the first time in their life. Like my parents had never voted, but the first time they voted was for Donald Trump. And that was sort of a trend throughout, and this is my experience with my family,
sure.
But that he had that pull, and it was, I felt that I could relate to it in a way, but I also, at that point, I was halfway through undergrad. My boyfriend at the time did not want to be at that Trump rally with me. And was sitting there, Cassidy, he probably saw it happening in my mind.
Was he a Republican?
Yes, but not a Trump Republican, yes. Was completely fine. And there were not big disagreements at that point about it. But no, and then, as I interned, so I went through 2 internships that summer on Capitol Hill, one for Steve Scalise and second for Ted Cruz. I applied for the Steve Scalise internship. I wanted to stay on Capitol Hill, so I applied for every Senate office. So it wasn't, Ted Cruz had an opening. I took the internship, just to be clear. So it was once I also began, though, to be exposed into the actual inner workings of Congress, and Republicans at the time had the majority. It seemed normal and natural to me. That was my first real exposure to politics, and I saw how House Republicans, at least from my perspective, how they were working with him to advance the administration's agenda, and they were passing bills. So it wasn't, there wasn't much thought going into the actual, nuances of the policies. Again, I'm not trying to excuse anything, but I at the time was 20 too. So
no, I was interested because in the book you're like, I interned for Ted Cruz, didn't like his politics.
Yeah.
Steve Scalise you liked, but you said he's more conservative than you were. But then you said that Donald Trump was moderate in some ways.
When I say that, and I still believe this to this.
He's more conservative than you were. But then you said that Donald Trump was moderate in some ways.
When I say that, and I still believe this to this day, and we could debate it if you would like to, although I don't know how debating 2016, his platform in 2016 is vastly different, but he did, in my opinion, have policies that weren't appealing to, let's say, Freedom Caucus members or appealing to the ultra right-wing conservatives. He had some policies that a lot of them didn't agree with. And even in the first 6 months, 8 months, throughout his presidency, a lot of the hard right-wingers didn't agree with.
Yeah.
So again, from a bird's eye view at that point, I
thought from just a political perspective of a political strategist, he tried to move, at least rhetorically, to the center on protecting Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, and at one point he said he was going to tax hedge fund people, and so
he did what he had to do at points to just whether it was during an election or in Congress or in when he was in the Oval Office, he did what he had to do. Donald Trump doesn't have a firm policy platform. You know, what I think did serve him well I was not on the 2016 campaign, but what I think did serve him well is he had some sound voices around him that understood Washington and understood what voters wanted to hear. And he sometimes would listen to them, sometimes would not. But, you know, as he
sometimes
went through, well, we use that term very loosely, but as he went through, obviously, the presidency, that sort of tapered off. And
so, like, I totally understand just being a Republican, right? Like, I worked for Obama in 2008. After the campaign, I made friends with a lot of McCain staffers, still friends with some of them. We'd argue about politics. It was fine. I am very proud of the race we ran against Mitt Romney in 2012. Though I also have like a ton of respect for him, especially of what he's done over the last couple of years, as I know you have respect for him too. But like even setting aside 2016 for Trump, like in just the first year of his presidency, there was the travel ban, family separation, Charlottesville, which was like the cause of the first set of resignations. And then, you know, there's all the stories around that Gary Cohn, the economic advisor, was thinking about leaving too. Like, how did you think about that first year as you were deciding to intern there in 2018 and then later work there in 2019? Like, did those incidents give you pause or policies give you pause?
Yeah, I'm putting myself back in that moment just for clarity.
I'm dying to understand it. That's why I asked.
After I interned on Capitol Hill, I mean, I fell in love with the institution. And that's why I wanted to stay. I fell in love with the House. I interned in the Senate, realized that I fell in love with the House. I
know. I read the Senate feels pretty slow, and I was like, yeah, we felt the same thing when we were in there.
Did you ever work in the Senate?
Yeah, I worked for Obama his first couple years in the Senate, and then he was like, yeah, this place is...
See, the House is fun. Things move fast. I like the, you know, things are different now, but regardless, another conversation. I had internships in both chambers. I had, in my opinion, great mentors who I still believe are not ultra partisan, aren't never Trumpers, but aren't pro-Trump necessarily. Like they're institutionalists. They want to see the institution function. And you know, after I spoke with them, and I was thinking about like, do I go to a think tank next summer? Because again, I did not grow up in a political environment, but my singular goal with graduating college was how do I get a job in DC? Mm-hmm. They knew that I loved the institution, and they're like, well, the Office of Legislative Affairs at the White House would be the best option for you because you are going to see how the two branches work together. So it was in that moment I was like, okay, that's my next goal. For me, it was just very. I had one thing I checked the box. It's like, okay, what do I have to do next? So I didn't really have any qualms about interning in the Office of Legislative Affairs under Trump, and perhaps I should have. But you know, even looking back now, and I'm not excusing anything that happened in the first year, but I think, you know, I used to say I was in the right place at the wrong time. I don't know if I was in the wrong place at the wrong time or the wrong place at the right time, but, you know, I think anybody that has the opportunity to intern or work in government or in the White House, I mean, you've been there. It's an incredible place. Yeah. But I learned so much in that internship that wasn't just, you know, how to be the slinger for Trump's policies. It's how does the White House actually work with Congress? Because at that time, too, my goal was to get a job back in leadership. I never thought that I would get hired at the White House after I graduated. Yeah.
But when you were seeing all those, what was your reaction when you read about all those stories in that first year?
I mean, I thought it, and I felt it was wrong.
That was crazy, or?
Yeah, but putting myself back in 20-year-old, I wasn't really putting all that much thought into it. And I wish I had. And this kind of gets a little deep philosophically with myself, but I've gotten some heat for this. I'll try to explain it a little bit better, but sometimes I do wish I had, really wish I had, because I think that I would have avoided a lot of this.